All right, in this next section, we're going to talk about the guide hairs and what they do and why they're important. Again, if you flip back to the main scene, we've got all of this hair that's going to be rendered or renderable, visible in our scene, but it doesn't know where to go. It's sort of just sticking up everywhere. And if I ran a hair simulation just on this, it would just fall wherever it liked. It wouldn't, and it might, tangle up with each other. It wouldn't know where to fall. And so we're going to do some guide hairs to help guide it or tell it how we want it to fall. And we're going to go to the General tab, scroll down, and we were just talking about these settings up here, but for this hair group, we're going to talk about the segments. It starts with a default of 4 segments per hair, which is really low. I'm going to do a whole nother tutorial on my findings on segments, but what I've found generally is that between 24 and 35 segments is fine, is enough to give you good hair curve. And what are segments? Just think of them as like links in the chain. So the more links that you have in the chain, the more bendable the chain is, the more it can curve, and the more, and so each hair having that many links lets it flow naturally or simulate bends naturally when it collides with things. Much more than 35, I don't see much visible difference. You could do like I did, which was I started off with I think 80, something ridiculously high, and so of course my simulations were much slower than they needed to be. But 35 is about as much as you can see the difference on it. It's plenty to get a natural curve of the hair as it bends, or at least 35 per foot. Longer hairs you would need more segments accordingly. And 24 is enough for animations, in my opinion. But we'll just split the difference, and I'll set it at 30 for the purposes of this exercise. Now down below there we have a little section of guide hairs, and it's currently set to 0, which kind of explains why we don't see any guide hairs yet. But we're going to change that to, let's say, 16 guide hairs. Okay, now it's going to, because we've got symmetry on, it's going to randomly throw guide hairs onto our character. And it is kind of random. You'll see there's big blank spaces where there are no guide hairs, and that's not good. We want there to be guide hairs evenly distributed, and so we're going to add some more guide hairs. And there might be some places where we might take guide hairs away because they're close enough to other guide hairs that they're sort of redundant. But this looks okay. So let's add some guide hairs. We click on the guide hair tool, and I'm going to do this wrong so that you make the mistake that I made, and so I can teach you the right way to do it. You can see right away that the guide hair tool is way too big for the head, but we can scale that down in our radius just like we did with the grow region tool that I showed you in the last video. 0.05 is pretty good, and we're going to do a center part hair, so it's kind of important to do a line of hairs. Whoa, what happened there, right? And this was a mystery to me. See how everything else is nice and even and sticking up in a very straight direction, but as soon as I started to add these extra guide hairs, they are symmetrical in that another guide hair appeared on the opposite region, but they're sticking in crazy random directions. They're not sticking up in the directions we would expect, and this could easily tangle in any kind of, if I started to drape things now, then this guy would probably fall over on this side, and I want him to go to this side. Now I could brush him over there, but there's an easier way. I'm going to remove these hairs. The way we do that is select the remove guide hair tool and make sure we get the little cross right on the dot. Boom, they're gone. And now when we go back to add it again, let's take a look at our tool settings to see why that happened. This should be checked by default. Carrara does not have it checked by default. It's the no deformation, and so let's just check that before we ever add any guide hairs, and then we can see that they will add symmetrically as we go along here. I'm going to sort of scroll it around so we can do the top of the head. Okay, and then so now I've got like that nice little part region right there that I can see is going to just naturally part across the top. And then aside from that, I don't want any big blank spaces. You don't want to go too crazy because the more guide hairs that you add, the more you're adding to the complexity of your render simulations. But it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have 100 guide hairs. I think anything above 50 is unnecessary, and probably 35 to 40 is probably an ideal number. I'm doing just a few bit more than I normally do just to be safe. How many do I have there? 50 exactly. So just to be safe, I've done that many, but normally I think I probably would just go with something like 40 or 35, 36 or so, because it is even numbers. Now we've got our guide hairs. Now the guide hairs are never visible in the scene. All these hairs exist to do is to be simulated in the way that they drape, and also to tell other hairs, hey fellas, follow me. And so hairs within a certain radius will follow that guide hair, and they will generally assume the same shape and directionality during simulations. So let's see, should I move on? Let me move on to the I lost my place. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the brush tool next, because it is your best friend. Actually, I'll do that in the next video. Let me just stop it here and we'll come back with a brush tool.